The Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper. And now, Coach Bill Clark.
Welcome in. It's the Coach Bill Clark Show, Episode 7, presented by Dr. Pepper. Pat Smith along with Landrum Roberts and the Coach Bill Clark. And, Coach, needless to say, Saturday night in Tuscaloosa, what an incredible game.
Yeah, what a great game. Just everything that was built up to be, from the start to the finish. We had explosive first half. We had the great finish at the end where Alabama hung on. Things that we talked about earlier in the show, I think, came to fruition. Both teams with the open date. What was that going to look like? What were the things that they had not shown each other? I think, obviously, Alabama had held some really good stuff back, and you got to see that in the first half.
Of all of the possible scenarios and how that game would play out, never would I have thought that Alabama would have built that 28-point lead.
Exactly. Who would have thought that? I think, and we're going to get into it, but what they did offensively. Let's start offensively first. Tons of empties, tons of quarterback run. We'd seen a lot of quarterback run early in the season, but the way they did it, the way they spread them out offensively, the ball was in Milroe's hands every time. It reminds me back to high school days when I always talked about the quarterback was better than everybody else on the field. That's what it has, but they've designed their whole offense around him. I loved how they used empty. I loved how they motioned empty. So a lot of cool stuff offensively. It really gave Georgia fits in the first half.
So let me ask you this, because Kirby Smart, after the game, he was very honest with the media in regards to, hey, listen, Alabama came out and did some things that honestly they just were not prepared for. There were some different looks. And as a coach, when you go back and you look at the history of Kalen DeBoer, whether it was at Washington, whether it was at Fresno, or you're pulling out old VHS tapes of him at Indiana, I mean, how far back are you going to try to look at that type of scenario in which your offense is, or you're trying to get your defense prepared to go up against an Alabama unknown offensively?
Great question. I think you go back all the way back. I want to, I tell you this all the time as a defensive coach, I want to know everything about this coach. What is his history? I think what you see with DeBoer, he takes what he has and uses it very well. You're crazy not to use Milroe. The only question with him is injury. But this is kind of the world I came from, where as we went to spread and we started seeing all this gun run, all the different ways to run your quarterback. You remember I said this is defending 12. Now you've got Williams sitting out on the outside and these other receivers. How do you defend all those guys? A pretty good running game across, and a quarterback that can take off at any time. And I used to say when we're rushing that guy, we really don't want to rush him. It's like it's a punt return. You know how you'd go down on a punt return? You might take a shot if there's other guys near you, but you're really going very cautiously. That's how we want to rush this guy, because when he gets out, he can go.
And the encouraging thing for Alabama fans, we continue to see the emergence of the freshman Ryan Williams, and you talked about him. But I loved what Kirby said. Georgia fans probably didn't like it, but he was just being honest, and he said, we can't dedicate an extra guy. We have to have that guy to defend against Milroe. It's the two-headed monster. It's the perfect storm. And you're encouraged if you're an Alabama fan moving forward. You just did that against one of the best defensive minds, let alone talent that you saw on that side of the ball from Georgia. If you're an opponent of Alabama down the schedule, I don't know how you have an answer for that.
It's hard to. Now, the morphing into the second half where they try to take some air out of the ball and run the ball, I think that would be a concern for Alabama. We need to run the ball. They know we're going to run the ball, and we could. Now, I think that's a strength for Georgia, especially in the interior. I think Alabama's offensive line got shown up a little bit in the run game situation in the second half. Alabama couldn't run the ball consistently like they needed to when Georgia knew it was coming. So that's something maybe a little bit of a worry, but I think they've got enough things offensively, enough explosive ways to keep people off balance. And, of course, you got the X factor in Milroe.
So Landrum and I, we've been talking about this on three-man front, especially in the second half. Defensively speaking, from an Alabama perspective, Coach, were they – I wouldn't say – I guess the loose terminology for me would use the term prevent.
Yeah.
Did you see that in the second half as the defense was trying not to get exposed with the long over-the-top plays? They were trying to keep everybody in front and trying to milk that clock. I mean, what did you see Alabama defensively in the second half that allowed Carson Beck to get a little momentum?
Great question. I think what we saw out of Alabama was a lot of zero pressure. We're going to talk about this defensively here in a minute, but you saw a lot of different looks defensively. Coach Womack came out and talked about how they were able to save things. They had, these are the people you work on in the summer. You're working on Georgia. And they're working on you. Georgia had less to go on.
Right.
You've seen who they are. They've been pretty consistent offensively. You also had a pretty good template from Kentucky on what they did defensively. I think you saw a lot of zero pressure. You saw a lot of simulated pressure, which means I'm showing one side and I'm coming from the other. You simulate coming this way and you come the other, zone pressure. And it was things they had not seen. Now, here's what happened in the second half. Georgia, the worst thing for them became the best thing, which is we don't care. We're so far down. We're going to go for every. I mean, how many fourth downs did they get? They're going.
5.
They're going for every fourth down. They got them, which is now you've added a down for them. They're also in no huddle. So now all these calls you're trying to make. Now think about this. This is where signals comes in. It's no huddle. You're trying to talk to the linebacker. He's got to turn to everybody. So now you're right back to signaling. If you watch them, what it did, it simplified Alabama's defense. All those simulated pressure, all those zero pressure. Look at their box. It was a 4-2 box. Looked like a man-free look almost every time. It simplified them. They got tired, which is what happens when you're going against 2 minutes. And then you got this very accurate quarterback who they may have found something with him to say, hey, we've got to quit being, holding him back, and maybe let's turn him loose and some 4 open and just let him throw the ball.
No disrespect to former Alabama offense coordinator Tommy Rees and the Alabama offense, but looking at this offense, this version of Alabama's offense under Kalen DeBoer and Coach Sheridan, and how they feature Jalen Milroe, and of course having a weapon like Ryan Williams, it certainly helps. But what is the difference in this offense this year versus maybe what we saw last year with Jalen Milroe?
I think they started figuring it out. We've got to run him more, and you saw him really get better last year. But I think we've got a coach, and I like to think I was in this world where you've had to do more with less. You've had to come into some of these different places and say, okay, I don't have this, but I have that, or we're going to feature this, or we're going to get better at that. And I think they really understand who their quarterback is. They're built for that. And they just had a really great first half plan, to say the least. Milroe played very well. You had a great play at the end of the game, but I do think they've really figured out the best ways to use him right now.
So I guess the question is, was it more of what Alabama did or what Georgia didn't do?
I really do think it was what Alabama did. I really do.
Okay. All right, Smart Bank's Smart Call of the Week here on this program. Kentucky's upset coach over Ole Miss. We talked about this last week. We did not see this one coming. It's a 17-point favorite at home. You're looking at an offense in Lane Kiffin, one of the best in the nation going into that game, and Kentucky showed up and they pulled the big upset.
Yeah, I'm just going to put the glasses on and read some stats. 7 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Ole Miss was 1 for 10 on third down. They won the turnover battle. Of course, offensively, they were 3 for 3 in the red zone. They were 3 for 3 on fourth down. They've held the last 3 opponents to 36 points or less. So, Kentucky, you've got a head coach who's a defensive guy who gets it. I think now we're going back after we're watching the second half of Georgia and saying, okay, that was a really Kentucky, who almost beat Georgia, really, they're pretty good defensively. They're very good up the front. They're in that 3 down front. I've talked to you guys about the 3 down front with the interior that's really hard to run against. It's called this mint front or the 3 down front now. But they're finding ways to get pressure as well. So I think defensively they did a good job. Obviously, offensively they did a good job on fourth down. They had the big fourth down play at the end of the game that changed the game. Close game, came down the end, but it was a huge win for Kentucky on the road. So you got to give them tons of credit.
So if I'm Shane Beamer, I'm South Carolina, that staff getting ready for Ole Miss coming in to Columbia this weekend. Is there a recipe? Is there a blueprint? How Kentucky did it? Can they defend and take some things away in Jackson Dart in that offense?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So look at South Carolina and look at Kentucky. They're built differently. South Carolina is very strong in the interior. South Carolina has got those 2 really good edge rushers, specifically that freshman. So that's a 4 down with South Carolina and 3 down. Even though they're all going to be very similar, I think personnel they're a little bit different. I think they're probably going to rush the passer well. But what Kentucky is able to do is say, you're not running the ball. So all that inside zone read to form those RPOs, that was just shut down, and I think it allowed them to play the pass game better.
All right, so let's talk about in regards to Ole Miss and the psyche of this football team. I know, unfortunately, you've probably been there as a coach at times where you've lost to someone that you thought that technically you shouldn't have lost to. How do you get these kids back motivated? Because it's a lot different nowadays, Coach. I know it's an expanded college football playoff, but this team had a lot of pressure, a lot of headlines over the summer that this team was college football playoff bound, and all of a sudden, this is a must-win this week.
Yeah, this is where coaches, earn their money. I do think kids are more resilient than we think they are. I think sometimes, that 24-hour rule, I would always be amazed sometimes that we just got back on the practice field and those guys were like, they're moving to the next one. Now, they're going to hurt. But we've seen enough teams with one loss and how they've handled that. So this is, once again, sometimes you just need to get back on the practice field. You need to put that one behind you, and you're already watching the film for this next group. That's the one good thing I always used to say, man, it's a killer and it's tough, and especially with social media, people keep playing your head, but you are forced to move on. You have no other choice.
And the way that it plays out, and for Ole Miss fans, and we looked at the schedule for the Rebels heading into the season, we thought, well, this should be a bottom line 10-2 at worst regular season team. Now South Carolina, they, to their credit, look much different than they did in the offseason.
Yeah.
Now you got an LSU team that's got a bye week, and they're getting ready for you to come into Tiger Stadium in a night game in Baton Rouge coming up next weekend. All of a sudden, you do start feeling some of that pressure, I would think, if you're an Ole Miss player.
Yeah, and I think you see that schedule. I mean, it's not like you're not looking at it. I mean, Lord, who's open before us? Who have we got next? How are we going to feel the week before? Man, we got to win this game because I know how hard this one's going to be. Obviously, that's the world they're in. I mean, it's brutal. It's week in, week out. The bottom dwellers, so to speak, are good, especially at home or when they're coming after a loss. You know, those guys are fighting for their lives. Those kids are on scholarship. Those kids are getting NIL money. That coach, you know, and that's why I always say you never know what's going on, not counting an injury or a mindset or reading your press clippings or whatever. That's the job you have to do as a head coach. It's so hard. Keep everybody's head screwed on and maintain that focus week after week after week.
Well, no question about it. Kentucky with the Smart Bank Smart Call of the Week, and that's a good call for a lot of people to go call Smart Bank.
Yeah, you know, I've had a lot of friends that have started using the guys at Smart Bank, and they say it's small town banking. It's what we all grew up with. That's what I love. It's easy for me to say use those guys and have other banking relationships in our history. But I know Smart Bank, they're guys you can count on. They'll get you answers very quickly.
Webb Concrete and Building Materials, building blocks to victory. And the matchup we're going to kind of go into is Georgia and Auburn, Coach. And you were at Auburn last Saturday, and just an impressive game plan, in our opinion, in regards to what Auburn was trying to do against Oklahoma, and had that one mistake that really cost them.
Yeah, you know, I think from really other than the first drive by Oklahoma, really top to bottom, so impressed with the game plan. I thought all sides of the ball need to get in Hunter's hands more. But I thought the quarterback played well. I thought he made great decisions to the end of the game. Oklahoma, very talented defense. They moved the ball on them. I thought their defense played well. Had the mistake right before half, and I think that was questionable. They got out there in time to kick the field goal, get another chance. I mean, some of that's got to go to the kicker. I don't think they handled the clock probably as well as they should, but I was very impressed with them as they go into play this really good Georgia team.
Hugh Freeze owning it in his press conference on Monday and talking about some of those situational things that happened in that game. Probably should have run it here, done that. As a coach, without getting in your own head and becoming your own worst enemy, moving forward, does a guy like Hugh Freeze, because he's been at it for a while, does he learn from these mistakes? And you think Auburn is better for it?
Yeah, I think you should learn from them. All those mistakes, I was telling somebody about, whether it's a Hail Mary or turning the ball over to lose a game. And I think that's why your players always think you're crazy if you're that guy. If you say, look, I've lost this game before this way, we're not going to lose it again. I think it really affects you. Now, turnovers, and I have a talk I give about the things we believe in as a team, being ready and protecting the team and all those things. Maybe you've heard me say these things before, but in that mantra is the ball. The ball is the game. Now, you got to throw the ball. We know you do. But ball security, if I'm sitting here on offense, it is protect the ball at all costs. You brought one of my players in here. What's the biggest stat? The ball. So offensively, you're protecting it at all costs. Now defensively, we've got to get it. But it is the number one stat in the game. It is the number one stat. So that's something you got to look at yourself, hold the mirror up to yourself and say, are we doing the things offensively that are creating turnovers? And that's something, is that a question they can learn from? When we talk about these games, we've been talking about the team that lost a turnover battle usually loses. I mean, they do.
Let me ask you a pedestrian question about turnovers. Okay, if you had a player, a running back, that just would never hold on to the ball, or maybe had multiple guys that just would not hold on to the ball, what would you do to try to fix that in practice?
I think you're doing everything you can consistently to check his ball security. Is he high and tight? When he gets in traffic, does he do the X? Does he secure the ball as soon as he catches? Is it a big deal? Is he obsessed? Now, you hear how I'm saying
So
this.
basically more, is it a mechanical thing or is it a psychological thing? That's what you're kind of reviewing in practice?
And I would say this with Dwayne McBride. Do you remember Dwayne McBride? Played for us, great player. He ran so hard and he took so many shots. A lot of times he would break through tackles and then he would be stood up because he's still fighting. So there was those things where we're really looking at him saying, hey, he's putting the ball on the ground. So he's so good. What is he doing? But we talked about it. We worked on it. We obsessed over it. He obsessed over it. Somebody said, well, you can talk about it too much. I don't think so. I think you make it that big a deal.
All right, so that's for someone fumble, and that's, there have been a couple of situations with Auburn's running backs where they have, but I wanted to move to the quarterback position.
Yeah.
And when you're in that quarterback room and you're sitting there looking over the film, what are the things that you're saying to the quarterback? What did you see? What was the read?
Yep.
Why did you go? Take us through that type of conversation when you have a quarterback like Peyton Thorne has turned the ball over a great deal throwing it.
And, it's just kind of like opinions that we all have, right? I mean, I know we could say Brett Favre, hey, he threw some interceptions, but look at the great plays he made. And you were willing to give up a little bit of that because he was so dynamic with the football. A little bit different here. We've got a good quarterback. We've got to be smart. And you've got to teach him sometimes taking the sack or just take it down and run it. If there's any worry, if there's any decision. And, guys, here's the thing. I'm watching an RPO on the goal line. Once again, it was a read. You throw the ball over. Now, it was just dropped. But it gets tipped, whatever. So, there's different mindsets here. That's just how we play. And that's when I say when there's the mentality of we don't care, we're going to take every chance. Sometimes that works, sometimes it don't. I'm of the opinion, though, when you're throwing the ball over the middle, especially on those quick throws, you got to be extra careful.
Yeah, and I guess it's encouraging for Auburn fans because you've seen explosiveness. You've seen explosive plays pretty much all season, but Peyton Thorne did seem to have a little bit of that confidence back when he was able to hit a couple of deep balls. You had two in the game on Saturday. Thought he made some really good throws and thought it was a solid performance with the exception of what happened in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, it's really, I left that game really sad for those guys. Knowing Coach Venables and knowing guys over on that staff. But I was sad for the Auburn guys because I thought they did a very good job. I thought it was a good plan. I thought they played hard. And especially for the quarterback, I thought he had a really good day minus that.
All right, let's talk about the game plan for Auburn because you were there. You saw, obviously, all 22 for Oklahoma. Obviously, Auburn, you were able to kind of digest what you saw, the game plan Auburn had, and you got to see, obviously, later that night, the Alabama-Georgia game. How does Auburn go into this? What is their game plan if you, Coach Clark, was putting something together to attack Georgia?
Yeah, first thing you're looking for is where are the weaknesses. You've got a couple good games in a row to look at. You've got a defensive plan that Kentucky used, and you've got what Alabama did in the first half. What did they do? What did they quit doing in the second half? How did Georgia make the adjustments? Obviously, they started going for a lot of fourth downs. They're in 4 open. You've got some really good templates to look at, and you played well. You played well in this last game, a game you should have won. I think it was a little bit different, maybe even the other games. I thought they actually played well. Maybe some of the others, maybe they should have won, but I thought this game they played well. You got to build on that. But I think there's things to look at in Georgia. Now, let's look at the second half of Georgia. Wow. That tells you how good they are. That tells you how well they're coached. I'll tell you, if you weren't impressed watching Kirby Smart, whether you're a fan or not, watch how he coached the whole game. That's my kind of coaching. He's pleading with them. He's imploring them. He's staying on them. That's what it looks like. That's why I'd leave a game exhausted. I'm not sitting over there with my arms crossed. That's what it looks like, how he coaches. So that guy, they're going to be tough. They're going to be tough coming off a loss. So Auburn's got their work cut out for them. There is no doubt. But I do think there's some templates. You're played a lot better, and there's some guys to watch. And sometimes it's just good to get on that road. It's us against the world and embrace that.
Offensively, you mentioned Jarquez Hunter and maybe feeding him more. Do you think we get a heavy dose of that, try to shorten the game? Do you think we get more design runs? Peyton Thorne was able to use his legs effectively in the game versus Georgia at Jordan-Hare last season.
Yeah.
How do you attack them offensively?
Well, you got to give Hunter the ball. You got to give him the ball. Now, I think that's Georgia's strength. I think we saw that. That's kind of their strength. So maybe this is kind of a tough week to give him some of the carries you would want to, but you got to keep feeding this guy. the best running backs get better as the game goes on. It's just a fact. We can look at where they were at 5 carries. I'm going to look at Bo Jackson, 10 carries, 15. When they start getting those extra carries, there's just something about it. So you got to give this guy enough carries because he's that good. You also got to work the perimeter. That's what I thought Alabama did a good job. They went out into the perimeter. They gave them different looks. Because Georgia, now, if they've seen it, that's what I always said. If I had seen it, we're going to be pretty good at it because we're going to rep it some more, walk through it, et cetera. So you got to give them things they hadn't seen as well.
Webb Concrete and Building Materials, Coach, I know very dear to your heart and good people.
Wow, Phil Webb, what a great company, what a great guy. You know, talk about their locations: Oxford Showroom, Oxford Ready Mix, Heflin, Roanoke Ready Mix Center, Pell City, Lumber, Concrete, Flooring, Birmingham, and Homewood, and you get all your building supplies from those guys.
All right, Landrum, I got a feeling that Coach's top 5 list this week, brought to you by Alabama Power, the Alabama Power 5 of the week. Got a feeling there might be a little shakeup.
There better be a shakeup.
Oh, I've been threatened here. Threatened. I guess since you guys threatened me.
All due respect, come on.
No, Alabama's number 1. I don't think there's any doubt. They proved that, and I'm probably going to be like a lot of folks. I don't really look at everybody else's, but Texas 2, Ohio State is playing well. I want to see them get some better competition. Tennessee, it's going to be good with Arkansas, right? Coming up, Georgia's 5, Oregon 6, Penn State 7, 8. I've got Miami. 9 is Missouri. 10 is Michigan. USC, I kept them in. They had a big comeback. I guess Ole Miss is still in there at 12, and here comes Clemson starting to work their way up at 13. I included them.
Well, if you're Georgia, and based on what we've talked about on three-man front, you know, that schedule and that runway is going to get a lot closer. And if they lose another one, this is a Georgia team. They need Clemson to win that ACC maybe to kind of help that CFP selection committee.
Georgia's going to be hard to beat moving out. No offense, Auburn. I mean, I'm pulling for you, but they are very good. I think we saw them in the second half see things. They kind of got to adjust. I think Georgia really does a good job in the second half adjusting as well. But I mean, you're right. They can't lose another one.
And to your point, and you would know this from head coaching experience, but if you're Josh Heupel or if you're Steve Sarkisian and you know that you've got Georgia down the road, you would have rather them come in undefeated,
100%.
Other than Kirby going back to the drawing board and trying to get things right.
That's right. You know, there's that animal up against the wall. That's the ones you worry about because I mean they're saying no tomorrow. So you know they're staying up late. They're doing the extra things. Maybe they were anyway, but they really know it now.
That is the Alabama Power 5 of the week, and plus Coach gave us a few others. But Alabama Power do so much for the community.
Yeah, I think one of the things, just look at Alabama Power Foundation. You can look at those things. They do so much from a conservation standpoint. I know that's a lot of our folks are avid sportsmen, but cleaning up waterways, endangered species, taking care of really the environment and things that are important to the hunters and those folks out there.
Donahue Chevrolet's Drive for Success, Coach. And we got to talk about the service academies. You look at Navy, what they came into Birmingham and did last week against UAB, what Army continues to do. Both teams now 8-0. Just so impressive what they've done.
Yeah, so let's start with Navy. We talked about them last week as they were getting ready to come in and play UAB. Super impressed with them. You remember I mentioned the offense coordinator, Cronic, who's coming there. And what you've got is a mixture of wing T. A lot of us know that from high school, right? Wing T mixed with option. He really wasn't an option guy, but he's added the option. And obviously at Navy, they've got the quarterback, Horvath, I believe. Remember I told you he can run, he can throw, very dynamic. Got to watch that game, came out and watched Navy against UAB. I'd seen them against Memphis, very, very impressed. Army, interesting stat. They had gone to the gun more last year. If you ever got to watch them, they're back under center. 90% of their offense is under center. Got some really good offensive players. What you got out of those guys, you got physicality, discipline, being a service academy, and details. I talk a lot about doing the little things, the details. I think they're going to be great in all those phases.
One thing in watching that Navy team up close, team speed at every position. This is not maybe traditionally how you think of some of those service academies from years past. You've got elite speed at a lot of different positions. Defensively, with Brian Newberry, we know that's his pedigree. What they do, and I think what makes it so difficult, and I'd like for you to speak to this, Coach, is changing that picture before the snap. And with their mindset, and they play neck up a lot.
Correct.
Very cerebral football team. It's almost like they're robots, and you're counting on them as the opposing coach to have to make that decision and not be in the right position. But 99% of the time, it seems like they are. Well,
they're doing two things. They're offensively, they're doing something that's very hard to defend with time. they're cut blocking people. They're reading people at the point of attack. I mean, obviously the history of the option offense. Now, defensively, let's talk Navy first. They're doing the things that fit their guys. They're very intelligent to be in the academy. They're smart and they're disciplined. All those things that make for good football players. Army the same way. They're doing the same thing. It's funny if you go read about those teams. One of the things I thought was very interesting. Navy says, one thing I know about Army, I don't want them to win another game. Army says the same thing. So there is no love loss as they get ready for the end of the year, but both of them are playing very well.
All right, let's talk about it from the UAB perspective because they had a week off to try to work on, try to prepare for Navy, and Navy came in, took care of business. Now you've got Tulane coming in, and then you've got to go to West Point, and you got to play another service academy that it's a different type of offense, but it's the same type of discipline issues that you've got to fix on defense. How quickly can you do that in season, or does that help them because they've already played Navy and then now obviously in 2 weeks? Army?
Yeah, since we're talking Navy and Army, let's fast forward to the Army. That will help them. There's obviously going to be subtleties and differences, but it's the same type blocks. It's the same option. You got the dive, the quarterback, the pitch. So that's going to help them as they get ready for Army on a short week.
All right, I saw you in the parking lot drive up in a really nice Tahoe.
Yeah, Donahue Chevrolet, DonahueChevrolet.com's our friend there. Gotten multiple cars from those guys. They're very easy to deal with, great folks, and go check them out.
Radiance Technology Defense of the Week, and we don't have to go very far. 58 miles from where we're sitting right here, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Talk to us, Coach, about Kane Womack's swarm defense.
Yeah, and of course we're specifically going to talk about the first half, how they jumped on them, started fast. In the first half, we had 2 interceptions, held them to 7 points, 2 interceptions, a safety, held them to 153 total yards, only 9 first downs. As you watched it, what you saw was a lot of zero blitz, and you're starting to see more of that. As you start watching games, watch for 6 guys up, 7 guys up, and this flat coverage across, which is this zero pressure. As we know, zero pressure means there's nobody deep. So this is a big deal when you're putting them up. Now, once you start bringing zero pressure, when you bring them all, which is more than they got, then you can start pulling guys out, and you can simulate. We're bringing them all. We're dropping out. We've got walked up over here. We're coming the other way. They did a great job of mixing it up into what Coach Womack said. These are things we've saved. So things that you're able to save, and that's a pretty big deal when you're playing those games. That's when you kind of say, why did they play bad? Remember I told y'all that. Why did they play bad against South Florida? They were saving.
Yeah.
They were trying to be basic, and that's what I always say. When you can be basic, maybe even look a little bad, and still win the game, you've got things to encourage. And when you can't save everything, but they were saving a lot for Georgia. They've been working on this since the summer. Thought they did a great job. Now, quickly to the second half. We saw them get tired. We saw Georgia kind of fall into this. They're going for every 4th down. But give them credit when they had to get the stop at the end. They found the way.
And going back to your point, and something you said earlier, especially with a team like Georgia and how talented they are and that coaching staff they have on their sideline, but showing them something they haven't seen. And you know as well as anybody, you know it's one thing to practice it and simulate it. It's another thing to try to work on things on a dry erase board or on a tablet on a sideline in game.
Well, that was one of the things I would always have guys say, Coach, we thought you were in this. I said, right. I knew what you were looking at. So I'm trying to give you something different, but when you go different, it's still got to be something you've worked on. So can I have something different that we've gotten enough reps on that will last when you finally figure it out? So that's the cat and mouse game of different but good and something that I've repped. But all you can go on as a coach is what you've seen, and you rep that, and all of a sudden I can give you something a lot different. You got a chance to be really good.
So when you were a defensive coordinator, obviously that side of the ball, how much did it depend on your personnel, depending on who you're playing in regards to how much you blitzed?
Yeah.
Or how many guys you want to bring on pressure, things of that nature? Because as we talked about, I think in last week's show, Joe Lee Dunn was one of these guys that he wanted to blitz almost on every down when he was at Mississippi State and at other colleges. So I ask you that question because as a coach, do you go into that and you kind of get the feel of the game, or do you go in that that's part of your game plan to get to, at the beginning that we're going to really go after him?
Great question. Being different. And that's what I would say. Same thing offensively. I want to be able to run it. I want to be able to throw it. What are they good at or what are they bad at? That's what I want to have those bullets in the gun. I think sometimes, too, you go in a game like this and say, hey, we've got to do something different or we won't stop them. So sometimes you kind of do something a little bit different because you have no other choice, or you're worried that we can't stop them if we don't, and it kind of leads you into something else. But I feel like it was, let's be different. Let's give them something we have not shown at all. And it really worked for the first half, for sure.
All right, that is the Radiance Technology Defense of the Week, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Good people up in Huntsville.
Oh, my gosh. Talk about Radiance Technology sponsoring our game down in Shreveport. The relationship I got to form with those guys, Bill Bailey and those guys. One of the big things they did besides sponsoring our show, they sponsored the Children's Harbor game that I'm so proud of that we do. Coach Dilfer has continued that game that I did all those years. Coach Vincent did his year. Coach Dilfer has kept it going, and we give money to give uniforms or jerseys, buy the uniforms, but give the jerseys to all these Children's Harbor families. Some of them are patients, some of them have passed on. We're able to give those jerseys to those families and bring them to the game. It means everything to them. So thank you, Radiance, and all our other sponsors.
Well, that's going to do it for episode 7. Thanks for tuning in. This is the Bill Clark Show presented by Dr. Pepper.
This has been the Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper.